Welcome to one of my favorite M cars of all time, the BMW E92 M3. Now before I got into Porsches with my 987 Cayman S and my current 997 Carrera, I was looking at picking up either an E92 M3 Coupe like this one or the E90 M3 Sedan. I felt that on paper it had a good balance of performance, daily drivability, comfort. Got some suicidal birds on this road today. And although I hadn't spent much time with one of these cars, everything on paper looked good. So I decided to trade with my friend Justin for a week. He has my 997 currently. And figure out if I made the wrong or the right decision. Now that is an engine right there. 8,300 RPM redline. This thing just wants to rotate. People say this engine, this S65 4-liter V8, has no torque compared to something like an LS in a Corvette. It is pretty gutless down low, but ultimately it's still a 4-liter V8. It has reasonable torque, but out here in the canyons, you definitely want to keep it in that 5,000 to 8,000 RPM range. Engine just sounds so good near redline. That's where all the performance is. And I have to say, it is definitely better than my 997 Carrera as a daily. The suspension is nice and supple. It has the EDC button here for the electronic damper control. So you get 3 different settings: the normal, the sport, and then sport plus basically. I like keeping it in the normal mode, the softest mode here. Feels good in the canyons, and it's plenty comfortable for daily driving. There's a lot less tire noise transmitted through the cabin compared to my 997. Something about that generation of Porsches, 997s, 987s, and everything before that basically, just transmits a ton of tire noise through the cabin. I love the interior of this E92. I think this is really a timeless design. Yes, you do have the the old iDrive system, but actually it's easy to use, it's easy to understand, easy to navigate. My favorite part of this interior has got to be these seats. I think these seats probably weigh a ton, but unless you're building a hardcore track car or something, the extra weight is definitely worth it. They're very supportive and supple, comfortable for daily driving, and the cool thing is there's these 2 buttons at the front left corner of the driver's seat here that actually lets you adjust these side bolsters here for your back. And if I adjust it just right, I actually feel like from the waist up I'm sitting in a bucket seat. Now obviously you don't get the same kind of thigh support as you get in a bucket seat, but hey, I'll take it. From the factory, these are some of the best seats I've ever sat in. My only gripe is that I wish I could sit a little bit lower. Let's hear that V8 sing. Steering isn't particularly communicative, but it's precise enough. I have it in the sport mode, which is a little bit heavier. Even without a ton of torque, this thing just wants to step out at you around every corner. Even if you don't want it to, it wants to. And it just eggs you on around every corner. The car is just up on its tippy toes. Reminds me a lot, in fact, of the M2 competition that I drove a couple weeks back. That car had a lot more torque, but this engine, naturally aspirated V8. The MDM stepped in there. MDM gives you a little bit of slit, but it still does cut in kind of abruptly when it detects that you're taking it a little bit too far. It does not let you hold a drift through a corner. The other thing I love about BMW M cars from this era, and even modern day M cars, there's a button on the steering wheel here, it says M, and you can customize this exactly the way you want it for aggressive driving. So I can change the damper setting, I can change the DSC, the power, which is basically the throttle response, and then the servotronic, which is the steering. So my favorite setting so far, leave the dampers in the soft mode, have the DSC and MDM mode, power in the sport mode, not the sport plus. I think sport plus is a little too touchy and sensitive. And and then have the Servotronic in Sport. Give me a little bit extra steering weight. And when you drive this car hard, you do definitely notice that it's not a lightweight car. This is no E46 M3. Not that that car is even that light, but this car definitely feels a lot heavier than any M3 that came before it. I believe this car weighs around 3,700 pounds in coupe form, and you feel every bit of that in the corners. The front end isn't as pointy as my 997 Carrera, but it also weighs 500 to 600 pounds more, so that's to be expected. That's the trade-off you get when you have a comfortable plush ride, plenty of sound editing. This engine just revs forever. It's ridiculous. Brakes on this car are fine, but they definitely could do with an upgrade, a big brake kit. Pedal is a little bit soft for my liking, and from what I've heard from friends, you do not want to track an E92 M3 on stock brakes with just pads. Okay, so going uphill, I do definitely need to downshift to get the engine out of that low torque range. Above 4,000, I would say. It's got plenty of usable power. So a couple of things I don't love about the way this car drives. It has a classic BMW rubbery feel to the shifter. Same thing with my old E39 540i. Basically every single BMW manual I felt feels like this. In fact, it even has the same shift knob as basically every BMW manual. Just doesn't give you that positive mechanical feel that you'd want from a sports car per se. Brake pedal is a little bit soft for my liking. I think this car does need a big brake kit. And the clutch also has a very long throw, and the engagement point is pretty vague. Definitely takes some getting used to. I know the clutch delay valve, it's a common thing that owners remove on this era of BMWs. I think a Porsche clutch feels a lot more solid, and you can tell where that engagement point is a lot better. Okay, so the other thing that you have to be aware of before you buy an E92 M3 is that this V8 guzzles gas like no other. We've gone through about almost a quarter of a tank just on that little run here. And the fuel tank is only around 16 gallons. So if you're driving even remotely aggressively, you're not going to get more than around 250 miles out of a single tank. Yeah, the way the MDM mode for the DSC, the way it holds you back is very abrupt. I think honestly I probably should have just turned it off, but hey, it's not my car. I'm not trying to chew through the tires too much. I forgot to mention the only modification on this car is the Dynon lowering springs, just slightly lower. Stock exhaust, stock engine. The exhaust note is actually pretty muted from inside the car, but you do get a lot of induction sound, which is fantastic. You get to hear that naturally aspirated V8 without waking all the neighbors, which is nice. Now, I've driven a modified E92 before with a really loud exhaust, and while it does sound amazing at wide open throttle, the amount of attention you get driving a BMW M3 with a super loud exhaust, that's not the type of attention I personally am looking for. Now, with the suspension in the middle setting, it is a little bit too firm. It is a little bouncy and unsettled over the bumps, so I'll put it back in the softest mode. Now obviously this car is also a lot more practical than a 997 Porsche. It has an actually pretty usable back seat. I've sat in the back of this car before. I'm 5'7". I have no problem fitting back there. It has a standard 3 Series size trunk, so plenty of room for groceries and what have you. Now between the coupe and the sedan, I would definitely go for the sedan. Not only do I think it looks better with that more aggressive squat stance, it's also more practical, right? You have 2 more doors, easier for your passengers to get in and out of the back seat. And because it has those extra doors, the front doors are actually a lot shorter. So when you open the doors in this car, kind of hard to get in and out of tight parking spots. Whereas the E90 M3 is just a little bit more maneuverable on a daily basis. I really, really like this car. I would say I am a Porsche fanatic now. I really do love my Porsches. They just achieve a really good balance of that fun factor as well as being relatively comfortable for daily driving. But the M3, the E92, it leans a little bit more on the comfort side of the scale. But when you really start driving the car hard, The driving dynamics at the limit, I would say, are maybe almost on par with the Porsche. And I'm also a sucker for front engine rear drive dynamics, so that's another reason why I just love the way this car drives. It feels so natural to me coming from an S2000. Having the ability to throttle steer the car, just, it always puts a smile on my face. In fact, a couple years ago, I almost bought one for, I think, 22 grand. I found a leak at the valve cover gasket when I popped the hood, and the dealership didn't want to address it, so I said, screw that, I'm not paying your list price. I mean, what other mechanical problems were they trying to hide there? It was such an obvious thing the moment I popped the hood. There's no denying that E92 M3, it just strikes such a good balance. So I'm very thankful to Justin for letting me experience this car for a week. In fact, I have a couple more days with it, so I'm definitely going to enjoy it. If you guys are interested in these cars, definitely pick them up soon before they continue to go up in price. I know the used car market, especially for enthusiast cars like this one, is crazy right now. You used to be able to pick these up for a touch over 20 grand. Nowadays, it's basically 30 grand minimum. So if you can find one for upper 20s in good condition, I would say it's a great buy. There's a couple of reliability related things, the rod bearings and throttle actuators. Get those done. Just keep in mind, you know, oil changes, you're gonna be doing like 8 to 9 quarts of oil per change. Like I said, the brakes are a slight weak point of the car. So with that, I am going to drive this thing around for another few days. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions about the E92 M3, let me know in the comments. I'll try to address them while I still have the car, and I'll see you next time.